Have you tried everything that you can think of to get your child to listen to you, to do what you want, and nothing seems to be working? Have you taken away their allowance and tried punishing them and reward charts? Nothing's working. You're going to want to stay tuned for this episode today.
Hi, welcome to the Parenting Bridge podcast. I'm Dr. Michelle Alden, a licensed professional counselor, parent coach, and family therapist. And I'm here to help you to build a bridge to your best family possible.
So today I want to talk about some of the differences between teaching and training and punishment and consequences. And I want to help you to be able to stay connected even through disciplining your child and staying intentional in what you're teaching. So let's just dive right in. I meet with parents of kids of all ages, and this is a common thing, is that the kids just won't listen. It doesn't matter sometimes whether they're 3 years old or they're 17 years old. It's a lot of the same thing. And I work with a lot of really challenging kids that have some pretty significant diagnosis. Severe ADHD is very common where I live, and the kids that I see, but autism and mood disorders and impulsiveness and all of that. And if you've listened to my videos for a while, you know that I talk a lot about how their brain is working and how it's wired. And we have a whole course on parenting the ADHD child, and I just want to encourage you to watch that course because it's not just about ADHD. I called it that because so many parents that's kind of the first diagnosis that they get, and a lot of parents are really struggling with their own ADHD. So there's some really helpful things about the way the brain is thinking, and I think that video might really help you a lot to understand more about your child's brain. And it also gives you, I think it's over 50 different tips and things that you can do to increase the executive functioning skills in your child. And some of them are just practical everyday things that you can do. And so we're going to talk about a little bit of that today, because I don't think that we can talk about how kids are behaving and not listening without talking about their way that their brain is going. And so a lot of parents today want to use a gentle approach to parenting. At school, I think that, there's definitely, trying to get kids to do what they're supposed to do. A lot of charts are used, rewarding good behavior, noticing those good behaviors. And those things are fine, and your neurotypical kids usually do just fine with that. They can understand, when I'm at this level, that the good things are going to happen if I'm on green all day versus being in red, or being angry or whatever the chart is. If I do my homework and I turn it in, then I get good grades, or I get, rewarded in some way when they're younger and grades don't really matter. And so your neurotypical kids can understand that. But what I'm talking about is kids that are extremely challenging, or maybe even just in your mind, like, well, I don't know if they're extremely challenging, but they're just challenging and they're not listening. And sometimes kids certainly go through different phases of where they have selective hearing and maybe even selective eyesight, where they look at you and then look away, and so they didn't see you, But certainly, like, it is a challenge when you feel like you're trying everything and nothing is working. And I think that's where, for a lot of parents, that discouragement is like they just throw up their hands and they're not sure what to do. So first of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about training and how training is a lot more repetitive. And if you think about training for a marathon or training for an athletic event, any kind of skills that you're trying to build, training for a job, it's going to take some time, and it takes some repetitiveness. And I think that's where parents get really frustrated. Maybe other people that are working with kids is like, oh, I've told them this 150 times and they're still doing it. And it doesn't matter how long I tell them or how many times I tell them. And I always think, I love this phrase that we use in our Healthy Foundations family program, and it's that it's going to take as long as it takes, and we're not done yet. And we just keep starting over until we get it right, because there is this repetitiveness that happens in parenting. And that is different, having to tell a child something more than once maybe 150 times, is different too than just repeating yourself. So there's a balance there, because on one hand, I teach parents to not repeat themselves, to not have to say something over and over in the same thing. So like, Johnny, come here. Johnny, come here. Johnny, come here. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I want you to get their attention, say it once, get that response from your child, and then have them do the thing. And that's the goal, right? But when we just, repeat ourselves over and over and keep saying their name or getting louder, and that's a lot of what happens. Instead of teaching or training, instead we end up like getting louder, and our consequences become more forceful, because we're upset, and also because we feel like, well, they should have to pay for making us so upset, or for not doing what they should have done, or for hurting somebody, or all these things. So I want to get into all of that. I don't know if it'll all be on this video, but I'll do my best to make it concise enough that it can give you some things today to think about. So in that mode, when we get our child's attention, and then we want them to do something, I encourage you to be really intentional about it. So make sure that you have their attention. And if they didn't hear you the first time, when you said their name, they probably aren't going to listen to the rest of it, right? Very few kids that I see are looking down or doing something, and the parent says their name, and then they give the instruction, and the kid's still looking down and doing something, and then they just suddenly get up and do it. Usually you need to say their name, and that involves a lot of times going to them. If you don't want to be yelling at your kids, if you don't want to get louder, you're going to have to go to where your child is and get their attention. So, you're standing close to them, and you're saying, Johnny, and they look up, and you're saying, it's time for us to turn this off, and let's go. And there's going to be this resistance, right? But if you're right there, you're going to be so much better able at dealing with that, because then you are really close to be able to wait with them. You're really close to be able to redirect them, and you're really close to be able to be in safety mode if you need to, because some of the kids I work with are really explosive, and you can be standing right there, and when they finally decide, okay, I'm going to do it because she's not going to go away, they're going to throw something down or throw something at you. And so parents being closer are able to deflect that a little better and be able to deal with it better. And sometimes with your younger kids, it may involve saying, let's go, I can help you, or you can do it yourself, and you're moving them through. And so it's being, making sure that you have their attention, and making sure that you're right there to then kind of steer them and teach them the direction you want them to go. It's not a forceful thing. It's not grabbing them and pulling them. I'm really against that kind of stuff. And it's more about being right there to redirect and to kind of shape where you want them to go. I look at it as parents kind of being the scaffolding. And sometimes with some kids, because of their delays or because of their, just struggle that they have in understanding things, they're gonna need that scaffolding maybe longer than other kids do. So yeah, maybe your typical kid at 7 years old was able, did all these things and was helpful and didn't cause any problems, and now your 3-year-old boy who's just bouncing off the walls and really defiant is not listening at all and not doing those things. And that's because their brain is wired differently, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they've been raised differently. So with punishment, and a lot of people today, will say like, well, we don't punish, we're not punitive, but we do give consequences. So, and there's a lot to be said about natural consequences and things that happen naturally. If you're having to come up with a consequence, it's probably not natural. So if your child, this happens a lot with teens. If your kids aren't getting good grades, or they messed up at school or did something at school, and it's non-related to anything with electronics, which sometimes it's not, it still is tied, but let's just say it's not, and then your consequence of that is that they're grounded, or you take their phone away. there's not enough tie-in there. And so I have a problem with the way that we do consequences and punishments, even when we're trying to be like therapeutic or non-aggressive in it. I think that the best kind of consequences are those that kind of naturally fall, right? Like if a child wears the wrong kind of shoes to go on a walk and then their feet hurt, but we still have to get home. And so it's like, well, that's kind of what happened. We don't then need to go home and then punish them in some way because of that. I've worked with parents where it's like, things happen because kids are busy playing. They might have an accident, break something, and the consequence of that isn't to then send them to their room or to let them not go do something else. It's to help them to repair or fix or clean up whatever it is that happened. And so when we use consequences, I try to look at it as like, when this happens, then this is what we're going to do. And so I think it also can really help with, especially with older kids, to kind of have those written down. We do that in our Healthy Foundations family program, where we help parents to write down, like, when this happens, this is what I'm going to do, because there's nothing worse, I think, as a parent than not knowing what to do, where you're just like, oh, they keep doing this and I don't know what to do about it. I've had parents that have been, really upset in the moment. They haven't worked with me at all, and they want me to fix something, right now. Well, can you make them, get off their electronics or whatever? And it's like, no, because part of building this is that I have to teach you how to be more intentional and teaching and set boundaries and help kids through those transitions, because some transitions are definitely harder than others, but most kids that I work with struggle with all different kinds of transitions. So telling them to stop doing something is really, really difficult. So we work a lot too on, not only on, when this happens, then do this, but sometimes we work on, instead of this, we're going to do this. And that's really good for redirecting. So think through in your mind some of the things that your kid does that drives you crazy, and I want you to think about, okay, well, instead of doing that, what do I want them to do? It's much easier to get a child to do something than to get them to stop doing something. So, for example, kids may be running around the house playing, slap tickle or bouncing on the couch. Rather than saying stop bouncing on the couch, give them a directive of sit down, sit on the couch. And again, remember, I'm expecting you to be intentional, to be moving towards them, so that if you need to help them, and also so if you need to assess, how escalated they are, you're right there to do it. Because if they're bouncing up and down on the couch and they can't follow that directive, like they sit down for a second and then they jump up again, that they're getting pretty escalated, and so that's going to mean that you're going to need to intervene in some other ways. And the other piece, I think, of this that is really, really helpful for our kids, for our own brains, is we need to think about cause and effect rather than just discipline or punishment. Discipline is not a bad thing, right? Like, it's really not a bad word, but it's been used as punishment, right? I'm going to discipline you. But really, discipline has to do with using training to develop or teach someone. And so that's what we're doing with our kids. Like, we're developing them. We want to help them to be functional. We don't want them to jump on the couch, not only because it ruins our stuff, but we want them to know how to live in a house, how to handle other people's things. It's not about our feelings. It's not about their feelings. It's about helping them to be functional. So think about, when this happens, then this is what I'm going to do. Having those things spelled out can help you a lot. It's like I said earlier that transitions are really, really difficult. And so if you can give your child a warning, it's like, okay, you tell them, you set up the parameters ahead of time. We're gonna have this activity for 20 minutes. And when it gets close to the 20 minutes, I'm gonna tell you that it's time to start finishing up or getting to a place where you can stop. And then once the timer goes off, it's gonna get put away. And if we can't put it away right now, then it's not going to come out later today. And or if we can't put it away, then I'm going to help you to put it away, and I might not put it the way that you put it away the way that you want. So but it's setting that up ahead of time and then following through. So when it gets close to the 20 minutes being over, then we're telling the kids, like, okay, you have 3 more minutes, so I want you to get to a stopping place. And if you're in a stopping place now, we can start cleaning up. And then, giving them those instructions of what you want them to do. So, and it may be repeated, maybe like, why do I have to do that every single time, right? Because I want you to think about how frustrating it is for you if you're doing something and then you get interrupted and may feel like just when I started getting into it, then the time was up, right? It's so abrupt sometimes what we require of kids. It's like, they're doing something and then we intervene with our question or our redirection or, something like that. Sometimes because we have to, because what they're doing isn't correct. But a lot of times, even when they're doing something well, I've been in so many homes during downtime and reading time, and the kids are finally, it takes them maybe 10 minutes to get into it, and they're finally into it, and then the parent's like, oh, by the way, when you're done with that, I want you to do A, B, and C, and it's like, stay streamlined, remember, we're teaching our kids to focus on something for a period of time, and then how to come out of that and then get into something else. So it requires teaching and training, and I think we just think, oh, it should just be natural, like everybody should know how to do this, and I wish that they did, but they don't. And so we're teaching kind of cause and effect too, which is a part of the way that the executive functioning is maybe not working so well with your kids. They don't understand, like they're not looking at things thinking, if I keep walking, on the edge of this cliff and I turn, I'm going to go off. Like they are not, that's the cause and the effect, right? They're not thinking out all of that. So they're not thinking, if I hit somebody, they're going to get hurt, or if I take this away, they're going to be mad, even though they might be furious if someone takes something away from them. Their brain isn't working that way. So we have to teach those skills and train in them how to think that way. And we can't do it by trying to shame them or punish them, like, how do you think this makes me feel, or how did that make Tommy feel? It's like they don't know. They're not functioning in a way that they really understand the consequences even for themselves. The other side of that is that, especially when you've kind of charted it out, like when this happens, this is what's going to happen. And I have a lot of kids that don't like that, right? Because so they chose to not give a good response or to not do what they were directed to do. And now we're going to sit down and just take a break for a couple of minutes, and they don't want to take a break. It's like, can I just say I'm sorry, or can I do this? And it's like you chose the action, you don't get to choose the consequence. So just encouraging you as a parent to be steady about that and keep in mind, like, what am I teaching? And I think it's hard sometimes to know what we're teaching because we're just so in the moment, right? And we're dealing with so many things, and we're so often frustrated with the things that we've been dealing with for years that we may forget what we're teaching and what we're doing here. But really, we want to teach our children to be functional, but we can't do it by lecturing and talking them into it, punishing them. It's going to take a lot of, going through it. And yeah, they're going to make mistakes. We can have really good days and then have a really bad day where, it's like they know better and they know how to act better, but that day they didn't. And so we have to maybe take a step back and move them through that in a better way. And then later, we might have the opportunity to talk with them about that. Like, I've noticed that every time when we're leaving Grandma's house, this is what happens. So let's talk about how we can make that better. What's so hard about leaving Grandma's house? And then we can talk about it. But in the moment, when you're at Grandma's house and they're having a fit because they don't want to leave, that's not a good time to be like, what's going on? And why are you acting this way? And you don't act this way at home. And then blaming, Grandma because she gave them sugar or, did something. It's like, none of that's going to be effective. It's like, we have to show our kids, like, it's time to leave. Here's what we're going to do. I know you don't like it. And yet we need to go. And then, later, maybe even a week or so later, maybe the next time you're on the way to Grandma's house, you're going to say, you know what, it's been really hard when you leave. And so then you can talk through it. But remember, all of it is training and teaching. And when we have that mindset, as adults working with kids, we're going to be so much better than when we have this mindset that we're kind of like herding cats, right? And we're just trying to keep everything together and lower the chaos. And it's like, just trying to put out all these fires. And I know no matter how much I talk about being intentional and trying to help you to get around these problems, and there's days and probably moments, and it may be going on for a long time for you, that it's like no matter what you say, that's what it's like for me. It's like herding cats or chasing, monkeys around, and it's not going to change. I can't teach because as soon as I start doing this, then this kid. So, that's where you have to assess and see what you need. But I would just encourage you to really look into parent coaching. We have a parent coaching group called the Playroom. You can find that at parentingchallengingkids.com. And in that group, we go over scenarios, and then you can get advice, and you can learn from other people's scenarios, and you'll end up feeling more connected, and you'll have some new things to try. And if you're out of things to try, or you feel desperate, you have the Playroom to come to each week to get more ideas. It's also recorded, so once you join, if you miss it, you can listen to it. I think it's much better when it's live and you can be right there as part of it. But at least you have this opportunity. And some parents will go back and listen to it, especially if they did get coaching. It's like, oh, I want to remember what she said about that. So look at us for the Playroom. Parenting Emotionally Distressed Kids is my book. It will help you to build a bridge to better behaviors. And that's a great place to start too. You can get that book on Amazon, look up Dr. Michelle Alden, and get started on your journey of really being a teacher. And again, don't be afraid to reach out for help if you need parent coaching. If you have questions, you can leave those for us. Look in the show notes for any resources that you need. Thank you for listening today.
Thanks for listening to The Parenting Bridge. Do you want to learn more about building a bridge to better behaviors? Pick up a copy of Dr. Michelle Alden's new book, Parenting Emotionally Distressed Kids. Or, for more resources, you can click on the link for Healthy Foundations. If you would like to leave a comment or a question for Dr. Alden, there's a link in the notes. We'll see you next time, and remember, things can always get better.